You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the 12th Doctor story, Dark Water. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Very well, thanks. And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to follow The Secrets of Doctor Who in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Spotify again. Subscribe everywhere. You can also find us on our StarQuest YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you can now watch us in full motion video, in Technicolor, where you should be sure to definitely make sure you hit that bell, because you want to get notifications every time a new episode pops up. We want you to be able to watch us, and because it's fantastic, and we're going to the extra effort to let you watch us record this show. Another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy is called Pray Station Portable. It's the daily prayers of the church, the daily office, also called the Liturgy of the Hours, and you can find that, again, wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/PSP. And finally, be sure to stick around to the end of this episode because we're going to have your listener feedback. But today we're talking about Dark Water. And Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens in this episode?
This time, Clara Oswald is on the phone with Danny Pink and finally telling him that she loves him and that she's been having adventures with the Doctor. But Danny is suddenly killed in a car accident. Afterwards, Clara betrays the 12th Doctor by threatening to forever lock him out of the TARDIS to get him, in an effort to get him to rewrite history and save Danny. It doesn't work, but he is willing to try to help her find Danny and bring him back from the dead. They use the TARDIS's telepathic circuits to go where her and Danny's paths are likely to intersect. It turns out to be a weird scientific mausoleum with skeletons in giant fish tanks. While they're exploring the mausoleum, we cut to where Danny is at the moment. He's being greeted by Seb, a character we've seen in previous episodes, and he's being welcomed into the Nether Sphere, the strangely modern afterlife that we've been seeing people die and go to all season. While in the Nether Sphere, he meets with a boy he accidentally killed in battle when he was a soldier, but the boy runs away. Danny also speaks with Clara over a comlink, with Danny becoming increasingly distraught at speaking with Clara and the boy running away. Seb offers him the opportunity to delete all his emotions, and he's on the verge of accepting it, but he stops when he sees the reflection of the boy who has come back to meet with him again. Meanwhile, in the mausoleum, the Doctor and Clara have met Missy, who is pretending to be a robot that works at the mausoleum. Another museum worker, Dr. Chang, tells them that it's an institute run by a man, or founded by a man who learned that the dead are still connected to their bodies and can feel what is happening to them, so cremation is a really horrible fate. He also says, Dr. Chang says, that the skeletons in the fish tanks are actually encased in protective exoskeletons, but the dark water that fills the tanks only lets organic material be seen. Eventually, Missy decides to put an end to the charade. She casually kills Dr. Chang, activates the skeletons, who turn out to be Cybermen, and after she and the Doctor leave the museum, the mausoleum, which turns out to be inside St. Paul's Cathedral in London, she reveals herself to be the new female incarnation of the Master and says that graves all over Earth are about to give birth to new Cybermen. The end.
So, lots happening in this. This is the first of a two-part story
Finale.
For the finale of this season. Yeah, so we don't get resolutions for a lot of stuff. But, you know, the big thing in this one, and I'm remembering back to when I first watched this, was the death of Danny Pink. And it was abrupt and shocking to the point where I didn't believe it. Like when I first watched this, I didn't accept that he was really dead. It's a trick that Missy was playing, Missy was playing. And how did you guys react to that? Was this something, did you accept that this was the death of Danny Pink right off the bat out of the blue?
You know, it's one of those if there's no body, they're not really dead kind of things. At least was the first thought. You know, we've said that before many times, that in a lot of shows like Doctor Who, if you don't actually see the body, say, of the Master, then he's not really dead. Well, how many times did the Master come back? And so, yeah, I was kind of the same way, that this was a trick. This was, you know, it really didn't happen. And of course, well, it did. I mean, and Danny, of course, ends up in this nether sphere.
Right. How about you, Jimmy?
I don't recall having any problem. I don't recall rejecting the death. I mean, the possibility that he's going to return is, you know, I'm sure that occurred to me, but I didn't have a no, it can't be reaction. What I didn't like was so there were two things. The first one is that it subverted the relationship they had been building to. And I'm sure Moffat anticipated people are going to, you know, have a negative reaction to that, but he thought it would be worth the dramatic payoff, so he did it. And ultimately, Danny does not come back from this. I mean, he ends up as a Cyberman, but he doesn't return to normal life after this. The second thing that I didn't like about it is there's a plot hole. I mean, he dies at the most, from a certain point of view, from the most melodramatic moment possible, because Clara has just confessed her undying, eternal, permanent, maximal love for him. And then he dies. And she's just about to confess all the stuff that she's been doing with the doctor to him, which is also extremely important. And that's the moment he dies. But she's talking to him on the phone. She should hear the car accident.
Right.
The idea that it just goes silent and she's going, so I just told you I loved you. What do you have to say to that? And she's just, no, she should be hearing activity through that phone.
Yeah.
This is artificial. Moffat is doing it for juicing the drama when the woman's voice finally comes on and says, hello, I'm sorry, and so forth. I just, you know, picked up this phone, and it's like Clara should have heard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just unrealistic. Now, they say your drama is working when you don't notice or don't care about the unrealistic stuff, but I noticed and cared this.
Right.
I cared about this. So I didn't like that. Having said that, I've gotten used over the years to the fact that Danny Pink does die in this episode. So it's like, I know this is coming. It's not what I felt at the time, but I'm okay with it now. I still think it's bad writing to have Clara not hear anything through the phone and be completely taken off guard by this. But once you accept the initial death, I think the rest of the stuff before the death is fine too.
Mm-hmm.
But other than the moment of death, I think the episode is actually very good.
I agree. I liked it. Just the last thing I want to say about it is, because we can move on, but it seems like Moffat is betraying what he's set up in this rest of the season, including things like the Colonel Pink. Orson Pink, right. The descendants of Danny and Clara and all that sort of stuff is undermined and not explained. And it's frustrating because it feels like you've made a promise to the viewers and reneged on it. And as a writer, you can't do that. You can't say this is what's going to be, and then without explaining, at least giving some justification, no matter how lame.
He does have an explanation for Orson Pink that makes sense of things involving like a brother or something, but it's not ever presented on screen.
Right, and that's a problem. Yeah.
The irony is, how many times is the phrase Stephen Moffat doesn't like to kill off his character has been uttered on this podcast, and this is the one time where he actually kills off a character and leaves him basically killed off. I mean, he's a Cyberman, but
mostly dead.
Mostly dead.
He's only mostly dead, which is another. We actually do get well, that's a Princess Bride reference, not a Monty Python, but that's coming up.
It's also the first of 2 times that he turned someone in the Doctor's orbit into a Cyberman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up too. Is like he'll come back and do this again with Bill, and it's that feels kind of recycled. Like,
in Bill's case, though, we got to see it from a different angle because she becomes a Cyberman progressively in stages, and whereas Danny is just off screen, he just becomes a Cyberman.
Right. And of course, that doesn't actually happen in this episode. It happens in the next one. So we're kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but it's one story. I found it interesting watching this time, noticing as Clara is talking to Danny, as before the accident, she says things like, Danny, well, this is actually after the accident. Danny, speak to me. It's killing me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're the last person I'll ever say this to. I will never say I love you again to anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And, as he's dying, like it kind of rewards rewatching in that sense, as where you're picking up more and more subtle hints as it goes along. So I thought that was interesting.
The dialogue in this is really well done. Moffat has this gift for quirky dialogue that can also be very impactful, very meaningful, and operate on more than one level and express complex emotions. And we have that running throughout this episode. Not just in the initial conversation with Danny and Clara over the phone, but in the Doctor's later interactions with Clara and with Seb and Danny's interactions, and with all of the dialogue in the mausoleum. Moffat's talent for dialogue was really on show in this episode. I thought there's a lot of really complex emotions that are being expressed because Clara is driven by Danny's death into a kind of despair and she and emotional numbness, because she noticed that when Danny died, life just went on for people and it didn't seem to matter. And and she, there's a scene where she's talking with her grandmother in the kitchen, and it's an interesting scene. I mean, this is an example of the kind of the subtleties of the dialogue, but the grandmother is saying, when Clara is seemingly dismissing the importance of Danny's death, saying it was boring, people just continued on, it didn't mean anything. The grandmother says, but he deserved better. And Clara says, he didn't deserve better. Nobody deserves anything. I don't deserve anything, but I'm owed.
Right.
Mm.
And it's like, okay, there's no actual difference between deserve and owed.
Yeah.
But that's an illustration of how Moffat is playing on some real subtleties in the emotions here. And then the grandmother says, well, who owes you? And then that's when the doctor calls or picks up the phone.
I felt like in that scene, Clara was like saying his death is boring and ordinary because of all the things that we encountered, that I've survived, that even Danny has encountered and survived. He gets hit by a car crossing the street, and it just seems unfair that he should die in such a boring, ordinary way, or something along those lines.
Also, would the cars they have in England actually kill you crossing the street?
I think people do die in car pedestrian accidents in England. I think there's probably a statistic on that.
They haven't banned cars that can kill people yet.
Okay. The cars in Europe and England that they make these days seem very lightweight, but okay. Yeah.
It wasn't one of those tiny Italian smart cars. Father Cory, you were going to say something?
Oh, it struck me too with Clara, how she basically goes emotionless, trying, out of shock, a natural reaction. But then you contrast that to Danny Pink, who he's dealing with all these emotions in the afterlife, quote unquote, and he has the choice to get rid of his emotion. And of course, the emotionless Cybermen
Right.
This idea of removing that emotion removes your humanity too.
That's good. That's a good point. Yeah. And that emotionlessness, that despair that she's apparently feeling, so drives her into doing something unthinkable, which is,
this is because really great. I love this sequence.
Oh yeah.
She's on the TARDIS, and the doctor doesn't yet know that Danny's dead, and she's kind of, oh, I want to go see a volcano. Like, she's got this all planned out in her head, and as she's talking to him, she's surreptitiously walking around the TARDIS control room, collecting all his keys from all the various hiding places that she knows about.
She knows he has 7 keys, and she grabs them all.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it kind of shows how Clara has become so almost too powerful at this point. She's too much like the Doctor in that sense. Like we talk about all the time, especially in New Who, companions becoming too Doctor-like. And that's when they often leave the TARDIS.
That is kind of a cliche on this show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're seeing that from Clara here.
Our show. We talk about that too much.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, but in this case, like she has all this knowledge and this understanding, and she's using it, and she's including this whole thing with the sleep patch that she thinks that she's got, and so she uses it to threaten the Doctor, and so we have this scene of Clara doing the unthinkable. It's kind of wild to see a companion out of control.
The way it's presented is not as linear as the way you just described it, because we see the Doctor picks up this phone and then we're on this volcano hellscape like at the end of Lord of the Rings, and Clara is standing on the edge of the cliff, and the Doctor is facing her, and the TARDIS is behind the Doctor, and she's got the 7 keys to Doomsday. And to prove she is serious, she tosses one of them immediately into the lava. And when it hits the lava, we have the cloister bell sound. So we know something powerful and dangerous is happening connected with the TARDIS. And she explains, I'm going to throw all 7 of these keys away if you don't fix Danny Pink's situation. And the Doctor, and then as they're talking, we get these flashbacks where she comes into the TARDIS and says, I want to see a volcano today. And he's like, why? And he's resisting this volcano visit. And she's like, I've never seen lava. I want to see it. Oh, lava is rubbish. Prove it then. And so we have, this kind of standard Dr. Clara banter as she's going around collecting all of his keys. And then she says, those sleep patch things you had? Can I have one of those? No, you can't. If I'm having trouble sleeping, sorry, you can't have one. And then she finds them and takes one anyway. And so as we're cutting back and forth between the scene on the volcano ledge and how we got here. And on the volcano ledge, she tells him, every time you say no, I'm going to throw away one of these keys. And he effectively says no, and she throws away another key. And then she throws away, because he starts to try to regain control from her of the situation, and says, and says, throw away the next key, because I'm just going to keep saying no. And she doesn't do it immediately, and he says, do as you're told. And she says, when it comes to taking control, you have no clue. And she throws away all of the keys but one of them. Mm-hmm. So now there is only one key left, and she's not going to play his game about throw them away one at a time, and I'm not going to yield, so you may as well give in to me. She's cut right to the end of the game and has only the one left. And he still refuses to go back and change history. And this time he's got an explanation, and it works better than the Adric explanation. Because after Adric died, that was immediately what Tegan and Nyssa said to the Fifth Doctor was, we've got to go back and save him. We can change history. And the Doctor had to come up with an explanation for why they couldn't, except something other than, but the dinosaurs have to die.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he couldn't,
Right.
He couldn't really come up with a good explanation. He just said, never ask me to do that again. Here we've got an explanation. The Doctor says, if I do go back and fix and change history, I mean, I can change history with precision, but not in this case, because if I go back and change him and change history so that he doesn't die, you will never come to me right now. And if you never come to me right now, I will never go back and save him. And therefore, there's a paradox loop. It's essentially a forward-looking grandfather paradox. Maybe with Orson Pink involved, a great-grandbaby paradox.
Right.
But he's actually got an explanation. Now, of course, the explanation is itself something you can challenge, but he's got an explanation this time. And in this very tense confrontation, Clara finally throws the last key. And she has no keys left, and she breaks down crying and says she'd apologize, except she'd do it all again. And which is a really complex line, on an emotional level. And it's at this point the Doctor reveals that this is all happening in a dream state, that when she went to put the dream patch on him, it's not a sleep patch, it's a dream patch. It induces a dreaming state. And when she went to put it on him, he got it on her hand. I'm not clear if she was putting it on him the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been she was putting it on him when actually she was applying it to herself.
Right.
But one way or another, she ended up with the dream patch stuck to her hand, and he's been letting all this play out to see, how far she would go, which was all the way.
Right. I mean, it was needless to say, dramatic.
Scene. Yeah.
but well crafted. I like that back and forth intercut, because it really upped the ante and much more than a straightforward depiction would have been. So yeah, I agree.
Well, and they played it well too, that when it looked like she was putting the patch on his neck, that he actually reacted, and then it flashed back into the lava.
Yeah.
Like she had succeeded. And then of course, then they show later that he was able to turn it around and get it on her hand instead.
Right. And all the keys that she thought she saw in the lava were just scattered on the floor
Of the TARDIS.
Yep. And so, but in the end, the Doctor says, well, she thinks that he's kicking her out. He says, well, what do we do now? And he says, go to hell. And she thinks he's saying, get out of here. I never want to see you again. But then he kind of explains, no, we're going to hell or heaven or wherever it is that Danny is in the afterlife. We're going to go get him. And
this is one of two Stephen Moffat crossover lines that are self-indulgent. Well, especially here, this is very self-indulgent.
Mm-hmm.
So it is like at the end of the second. So each episode of Sherlock has each season of Sherlock has 3 episodes, except for a special. And in the final season of Sherlock, John's wife Mary dies, and in the first episode, first or second. Anyway, she dies. And she before she dies, she mails a DVD with a final message to John and Sherlock, specifically for Sherlock. And when at the end of the episode Sherlock plays it, the message that he gets from Mary is, Sherlock, go to hell. And it is a very, I mean, there's a little bit more to it than that, but the bottom line is Sherlock, go to hell. And we discover in the next episode, this was deliberately taken out of context. She's speaking figuratively. You have to go to hell in terms of your own life. You have to give in to your drug addiction in order to pull John out of his grief and get him functional again. And so she didn't mean what she said. Well, we get exactly the same Stephen Moffat thing here, where Clara says, what are we going to do? And the Doctor says, go to hell. And he says it in a way that totally leads her to believe she needs to leave, which she starts to do. And then he gets confused and it's like, no, we're going to go to hell. or heaven or wherever people go where they die. And it's another deliberately out of context go to hell.
Yeah.
It's the go to hell in the sense of Dante going through hell to get into paradise.
Yeah. And that's followed up by, I think, one of the better lines of the season, which kind of makes is one of the things that has really humanized the 12th Doctor, and people still share today as a meme. But he says, yeah, you betrayed me, betrayed my trust. You betrayed our friendship. You betrayed everything I've ever stood for. You let me down.
No, she didn't.
Well, right. It's a little over the top. And then Clara says, then why are you helping me? And he says, why? Do you think I care for you so little that betraying me would make a difference? And it's a great line. It's a Christ-like line. I mean, that's one of the ideas behind what Christ has done for us on the cross was, we've betrayed him with sin, but that doesn't make him turn away from us. And so it kind of puts the Doctor in that savior role in that sense. But also, this is what true friendship and true love is like. Betrayal doesn't necessarily result in the destruction of things if you care enough for someone. So I really like that. It was a real nice moment. So we get to Danny now waking up in the Nethersphere. The nether space or whatever it is this place that
nether sphere is what Seb calls it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Just to make sure I had that right. And it's this place that Missy has concocted with all the gathering up the souls of the dead. And
we're later told that it's a data slice of the Matrix. So it's effectively a Time Lord hard drive that is archiving people's data patterns as they die. And it's kind of funny because he's getting interviewed by this guy, Seb, and I'm like, this is the good place. This is like, you wake up, what does he say? Something along the lines of, don't worry, like everything's going to be okay. And it's like, oh, wow, this is just like the TV show, The Good Place.
I would argue it's probably closer to hell than heaven because, I mean, it was pretty much a beige corporate office he wakes up in, the Nethersphere Afterlife Department.
Well, without spoiling too much, that's actually not far off from The Good Place.
But it is similar to The Good Place. It also has the kind of bureaucracy and the modern office, aesthetic. Has anyone offered you a coffee?
Good kind.
The good kind.
But it is also darker than episode 1 of The Good Place because there's all this stuff about, we hear someone screaming off scene and Danny says, "What's that?" And Seb is like, "Oops. Looks like someone left their body to science."
Right. And we have a burner.
Yeah.
But so we have this interview thing, and there's some good lines here. Like he's got an iPad that he's using to take notes. It's like, you have iPads in the afterlife? We have Steve Jobs, which, this was a few years after Steve Jobs had passed. But Seb has this explanation that he gives to Danny about the afterlife, which I think is another good one. He's like, imagine embryos had telephones. And Danny's like, what? He's like, no, go with me. Imagine babies in wombs could talk to other babies in other wombs. What would they say? What would they think life was like if they could talk among themselves? They'd think life was 9 months long. Then, boom, trapdoor opens, out you fall, gone forever. Never hear from those guys again. Nothing at the end of the cord. Well, and he says, this isn't really an afterlife. It's just more life than you were expecting. And I'm like, that's not a bad explanation for the Christian understanding of the afterlife, which is it's more life than what we were expecting. So I thought that was kind of nice.
Also, speaking about the what happens in the womb, I was recently I was filmed for a panel on a show called, I had never heard of it, but it's called Stephen Colbert Tuning Out the News. And it's a partly animated, partly live action comedy news show. And they wanted me to be on a panel of pro-life speakers. And I knew what I was getting into. I knew that this was going to be, a mocking thing. And so I came ready for that. And I would push back on the hosts. Most of the people they got, now the first thing they got was, it turns out once we actually get on the air, in the recording session, we're all guys. And the first thing I said is, where are the pro-life ladies? Well, they didn't want any pro-life ladies because the setup joke is, so for an issue that has nothing to do with you, why do you feel so strongly about this subject? And if they had gone to me first, I could have pushed back on that comedically, like say, hey, who do you think fathers babies? It has something to do with us.
Yeah.
But they wanted to, most of the people, everybody on the panel but me and one gentleman who is a professional pro-life activist, were kind of clueless pastors who didn't really understand the game that the show was playing. And so they got a lot of clueless answers out of them. And that's really what they wanted. Because I was being sharp and pushing back on their answers. So of course they cut all of mine.
Right.
But one of my answers was, the question was, life begins, this is from an ostensibly pro-life host, who's an animated character. And so it has the same shtick as Stephen Colbert used to, of I'm the real conservative in the room. So the anchor is asking me, who's played by a voice actor that I could actually see. He said, the question is, life begins at conception. So what's your favorite memory from the first 12 weeks? And my answer was, actually, my favorite memory is from before I had eyes, when I had to rely entirely on ESP.
That's good.
So if babies were relying entirely on ESP, maybe they could talk that way.
Yeah, maybe they could. How do you know they don't? This is, I guess it's a Paramount Plus show. Stephen Colbert tuning out the news. Did that episode air yet? Did it
aired last week, I gather.
Oh, wow. Cool. But you're not in it. So what's the point of watching it? So,
Yeah.
So I did. Yeah, I did. I thought that was a very interesting, look at afterlife. I mean, this is an episode about afterlife. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So let's kind of jump back to the TARDIS with Clara and the Doctor. They use the telepathic circuits again. And this time Clara is, think about Danny, think about where he is. Don't imagine him, but, think about him. And the TARDIS will take us where your timelines will intersect again. And the Doctor's thinking that's going to take them to the afterlife, but it takes them to this mausoleum, which we'll find out later is St. Paul's Cathedral.
Inside St. Paul's Cathedral. It's apparently run by an organization called the 3W Initiative.
Right. And then, and they drag it out. What does 3W stand for? And we find out that's the three words that have changed everything, which turns out to be don't cremate me.
And there's our second Stephen Moffat crossover reused idea thing, because if you then watch, so the idea is you're still connected to your corpse. So if your soul is, so if you're cremated, it hurts like hell, literally.
Right.
And it turns out that same idea is used in Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss's adaptation of Dracula. Which they did it's like a single season, 3 90-minute movies about Dracula, and you get exactly the same idea, that if you're cremated, you're conscious through the whole thing, you feel the cremation.
Interesting. Okay.
And they have that happen to a character in the show.
It's a very creepy idea, obviously, and would change many ways we think of things. But so we have this mausoleum. They encounter Missy, and again, I wanted to put myself back in the shoes of who I was when I first watched this, not suspecting who Missy was, but not having confirmed yet. And so then she's acting kind of like robot-like, and even gives the Doctor a big smooch, and he flusters him.
This is awesome, because she doesn't just kiss the Doctor. She is like incredibly powerfully kissing the Doctor, and it's this
making out.
It's like she's making out to him, and he's just horrified, pinned against a wall.
Right.
And she ends up by like and she's claiming to be a robot. She says, "I am Missy, Mobile Intelligent Systems Interface." And it's like, you can see, that would spell Missy. So she's pretending to be a robot. She's acting robotic. "You have not received our welcome package." And then she plants one on him and keeps planting one on him. And and he's just frozen with terror at what she's doing to him. And then she ends up by repeatedly kissing him on the nose. and then she turns to Clara, and Clara says something, and you also have not received our welcome package. And she starts to make a motion, and Clara says, I'm good.
I wonder if the kissing on the nose is meant to be like figuratively, this is on the nose, like this is, and it makes the reveal later so much more fun. Like this whole reveal of who she actually is, Missy, short for mistress, like master, and that Capaldi does it perfectly. It's just this horror comes over his face when he realizes who she is. I mean, it's really fantastic.
Well, and he knows that she's a Time Lord, or at least has two hearts.
Yes.
Because there's a point where she puts his hand on her chest and he can feel, she's talking about it comes from her heart, or her healing comes from her heart, and she puts his hand on her chest, and you see the look of like, I'm feeling two heartbeats. There's something, he doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
You see that look of this, there's not just one heart here, there's two.
He doesn't realize at this point that it's two hearts, that's what he's feeling, because she has to point that out to him later. And he finally clicks for him later, and he says, you've got two hearts. And she says, and they're both for you.
Right.
And which is a, reference to the master's previous, obsession with the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
In the initial sequence, though, where after she's kissed him, they're grilling her on, so I want to speak to someone in charge. I am in charge. Okay, but who's in charge of you? I am in charge of me. I am an autonomous robot. And, okay, who maintains you? I maintain myself. I am programmed for self-repair. And then for no real good reason, she says something about she depends on her heart. And finally,
I'm maintained by my heart.
I'm maintained by my heart. And they say, well, who maintains your heart? And she says, my heart is maintained by the doctor.
Yep.
And Peter Capaldi. And so this, of course, is very significant.
Right.
And Peter Capaldi says, Doctor Who? And she says, Dr. Chang! And she calls for him.
Yeah. But the doctor is like
very nicely written and very nicely played.
Yeah. I mean, that Doctor Who drop right there was so good. Like maintained by the doctor. Doctor Who. Yes. Like that's it, for who's on first. So there's that moment. And the calling of Dr. Chang. I mean, it was so great. I mean, again, we've said it over and over. Michelle Gomez is awesome. So they have these skeletons in the water tombs we've talked about, and it will turn out that they are skeletons inside the Cybermen shells, because you can't see anything inorganic. But I think here's a fundamental.
The dark water masks anything inorganic.
Right. Thank you. But Cybermen are more than just skeletons of human beings in the shell, right? I mean, they're a melding of the human and inorganic parts.
Yeah, so they're more like the Borg, but all of these Cybermen happen to be just basically skeletons with some extra ligaments on them.
Yeah. Which is weird. Then they're basically just robots, right? I mean, this
they're more machine than man now.
Right. I guess it's the her innovation is connecting them to the soul, which will all come up in the next story.
And as we found out from the power of the doctor, that yes, they just want to become robots to the master's chagrin.
Right. In the end, they want to get rid of all the organic parts. What was the deal with Danny meeting the boy from Afghanistan? Now, obviously, this was a boy he accidentally killed in combat, and so he's carrying this with him. So why was it so important that he be shown or connected with this boy?
The boy requested it, at least according to Seb.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Seb asks him at one point, have you ever killed anybody? Because he's getting this request from, he says it's very rare to have someone just show up like you did and immediately have a request from someone who's already here to meet them. And usually he implies because you killed that person. And they have kind of it's been facilitated for you to meet with this person. And usually that really rapid facilitation is because someone has killed someone. But
is this Missy kind of tormenting Danny, or is this something else. Yeah.
But who knows?
Yeah.
I don't think they follow. I don't think they give us an explanation on that in the next episode. They certainly don't in this one.
But it
it's
results in this deletion thing that's going to happen. Yeah.
Except it doesn't. The boy stops it.
Right.
That's what happens at the end of the episode. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I was confused. I thought the deletion, I must have missed a line, but the deletion was to delete himself entirely. Like this is a way to end your existence. But it was just delete emotions.
It was the emotions because he was having these strong emotions after seeing the boy and hearing from Clara and everything. And that's when Seb says, all you have to do is press this button and your emotions go away.
Oh, emotions. Okay, I must have missed that because that is what connects it to being Cyberman, because Cybermen have removed the emotions.
So let's talk about why he was upset, because they put him in touch with Clara through the interface. So Clara is in the mausoleum talking to Danny over a computer, and he's in the nether sphere talking to her through an iPad. And the doctor... Dr. Cheng explains that they've been telepathically scanning her, because when she came in, one of the questions she was asked was, did you come here to speak to one of the deceased? And Clara indicated yes. And so they've been telepathically scanning her to find out who is it she wanted to talk to, so they can put the two of them in touch.
Right.
So they've determined it was Danny, and now they've found Danny, and so they're going to let her talk to her like she was going to ask. And the doctor is being ridiculously suspicious at this point. There's some good lines, like this facility was founded by a guy with the bizarrely coincidental name Dr. Scarosa. I thought Daleks were going to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
With a name like Scarosa. But he was this is more Moffat finding the horror in the normal, white noise that used to appear on televisions back in the antenna days. Dr. Scarosa decided to run this noise through a translation matrix he had designed, and he got out the voices of the dead. And this actually taps into some parapsychological stuff I won't really go into, but he then heard the words and founded the institute and so forth. But you can communicate back and forth as a result. And so Danny, but the doctor, even though he was open to the afterlife earlier, and it's like, yeah, almost every culture in the universe has a concept of the afterlife, always meant to investigate it and find out what's true, and I just never have. So he's being open to it there, but then he becomes... So you're saying Dr. Scarosa was an idiot?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why? Well, he believed it was a telepathic communication from the dead. Why? Was he an idiot?
Yeah. And Dr. Chang then goes a few lines further, and the doctor says, so he was an idiot.
Right.
And those are fun lines and everything, but the doctor all of a sudden conveniently becomes way too adamant about the dead do not come back.
Right.
Because, dude, your plan was, let's go to the afterlife and play Orpheus and bring Danny back.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So if you're going to do that, other people could do that too. You shouldn't suddenly be not open to that possibility. You shouldn't be so adamant about it. So this is convenient. This is bad writing, actually, because it's inconsistent with what's previously been set up for the character in the very same episode, with no explanation for the change of attitude. But the doctor tells Clara that he's been telling her she needs to be skeptical and focused and clever and not wallow in her emotions for Danny if they're going to find him. So the doctor is going off to investigate the fish tank tombs. And he tells Clara, now that contact with Danny has been established, he tells her to be skeptical and clever and ask questions. Ask this voice something only Danny could know, because she says she recognizes the voice as Danny's, and he says, well, if they've telepathically scanned you, they could have lifted a print. Yeah, and if they've been telepathically scanning you, they can lift all the answers to the questions she's about to ask.
Right.
So this was one of the classic problems with investigating mediumship in the 19th century. How do you know the sitters don't just have the knowledge in their subconscious and the medium is just picking up on it? In any event, the Clara starts asking questions, and she does it in the most incompetent way. This is another flaw in the writing. She keeps telling him, say something only Danny could say.
Right.
Okay, that is not a question. That is a demand, and you're not giving him helpful information. I mean, she does, to be fair, ask a couple of questions, like what was the name of the restaurant we had our first date in, and he doesn't remember.
Yeah.
You know, which is okay. Yeah, he's got a Y chromosome. Big surprise. But after that, after this initial couple of questions that don't go anywhere, it just degenerates into him saying, I love you, and her getting frustrated and saying, that doesn't mean anything until I know who I'm talking to. And if you keep saying that, I'm going to cut you off. And then other than that, all she's telling him is say something only Danny could say. And she's not giving him any guidance on what that would be that she would recognize. Because it needs to not just be something that is unique to Danny. He could say, when I was 4 years old, we went to the beach and I stubbed my toe. Well, she wouldn't know that.
Right.
You know, it needs to be something that they both will recognize as something that's uniquely Danny. And she's utterly not giving him any help. She's just being a demanding little child.
And I don't see that as a flaw in the writing. I actually see that is good writing for a flawed character.
Well, sure.
I see, that was intentional, that she could not ask the kind of questions. She was so emotionally tied up in what was going on. She could not come up with the questions to do that. So I don't, there are times, to blame Stephen Moffat for flawed writing. I don't see this one. Actually, I see this the opposite. I see this as he's really showing, although she's trying to play emotionally, distant from all this, that she's severely hit by it. I actually think this is one of the better spots of Moffat's writing in this, just saying, hey, she can't come up, even to ask, questions like, you remember back when, you were at the orphanage, things like that.
Right. It's sort of consistent with how Clara, especially throughout this episode, but even other times, just cannot manage to keep herself straight. Like even that very first scene where she's trying to tell Danny she loves him and confess to what she's been lying, she can't even talk straight to him in that. So it's kind of consistent with that, I guess.
She's sounding like the doctor. Shut up. I'm telling you to shut up. Keep shutting up.
Yeah. So I validate your interpretation of that. I see how you can take it like that. For me, it was frustrating, but I can see how you could take it that way.
And I can see how you could take yours too. So
okay, good.
There was just before that, there was a nice little thing between the doctor and Clara where Dr. Chang is trying to tell her that that what he's going to tell them if she's lost someone recently is going to be very disturbing. And the doctor says, she'll be fine. And she says to him immediately, speak for me again, and I'll detach something from you.
Love that line. And then she says, I'll be fine.
Yes. She will be fine. Don't speak for me. So I thought that was really good.
Also, we have a nice thing where in the dialogue again, where she's talking to Danny, and Danny's been saying "I love you" over and over again, and she says, "If you keep saying that, I'm going to shut you off," because that's not helping her. No, it's Danny, and which is true, but she Danny begins to discover what her plan is, because she wants to be with him, and she's willing to kill herself to be with Danny. And he's like, no, if you need to live your life. And he does not want her to kill herself. And so he deliberately tells her he loves her again in order to get her to shut off the connection and conclude it wasn't Danny. I shouldn't kill myself. And so he's saving her life by telling her he loves you and getting her to reject him. And that's very complex emotionally, and I appreciate that.
Yep. So while this is going on, Missy and the doctor are out in the gallery with all the tombs in the water tombs, and we have this interaction between Missy and Dr. Chang where she tells him basically she's going to kill him, and he's like, please don't kill me, I don't want to die. Say something nice first, like say something nice to me before I kill you, but I'm not going to kill you until you say something nice. And it's very confusing, and he ends up saying something nice and then she kills him, which is like, I mean, it's horrific. I mean, it's that sort of casual cruelty that the Missy and the Master are known for.
He's desperate and is so trying to say something so nice that she won't kill him.
Right.
It's like, I've enjoyed every minute of working with you, and I'm sure you couldn't possibly find it in your hearts to zap.
Right. Yep. Right. So, and then, we have this climactic moment where it's time to release the Cybermen, open the tombs, and have them emerge. And that's when she gives the line from Monty Python, bring out your dead, which I thought was a nice little touch.
And with the tombs opening automatically and this big matrix of tombs with Cybermen stepping out of them, we get our Tomb of the Cybermen shot.
Yep.
And then as they come out of St. Paul's Cathedral, and after the Doctor and Missy are out of St. Paul's Cathedral, we get all of the Cybermen marching out of, and there's the invasion shot.
Right. So, that's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I like the line between the Doctor and Missy as they're getting ready, as they're trying to escape, or as the Doctor's trying to escape. He says, I assume you've got steps. And she goes, of course, I'm not a Dalek. So kind of that Dr. Scarosa. I'm not a Dalek.
Right. That's right. And Missy says the key strategic weakness of the human race is that the dead outnumber the living, because she's found a way to animate the bodies of the dead in order to create Cybermen from them. So she doesn't have to kill the living to make Cybermen. She just, and as we'll find out in the next episode, has figured out a way to turn them into Cybermen in their graves, and they will rise from there.
Yeah, I'm not as wild about that idea.
Yeah, well,
also,
I'm sure we'll have less to say.
There will be people in the audience who will have recently lost people, and this is not.
Yeah.
This would be a little disturbing for them.
There'll be people on this panel that have lost people recently. So. Yeah.
That's not a pleasant thing to think about. But then we have the big reveal, the Missy reveal, and she has that line, like as I mentioned before. She, I'm mistress, and Missy in Capaldi's face. But then she says, I couldn't very well keep calling myself the Master, could I? And so it's just that lovely moment of the reveal. I just thought that was a really great moment in this episode.
Well, we've got the one great line too related to that, where the Doctor realizes that Missy is a Time Lord, and she goes, "Oh, Time Lady, I'm traditional."
Yeah, some real fashion.
She also, he says, which Time Lady? And she says, the one you abandoned. And okay, that's a description of Susan. Although it also could apply to Romana. Although that was more voluntary. The Susan was completely involuntary.
Right.
But I'm a little surprised they didn't explore that a little further, but those are the two. I mean, he's also met the Ronnie and a few other Time Ladies, but he never abandoned them. The two that he abandoned were Romana and especially Susan.
Right. Interesting. So, and that's where we come to the cliffhanger ending. Any final thoughts on this episode, Father Cory?
Nothing here.
How about you, Jimmy?
So I thought this was, with the exceptions I've noted, I thought it was a weird but good episode with creepy horror vibes, and a lot of interesting ideas to think about. One thing I liked that they did visually that they didn't point out, but they come close to, not verbally, they come close to really pointing it out for the audience, is the logo for the 3W Institute is a large circle with a much, much smaller circle at about, depending on which way you're looking at it, at about 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock. And that is, it's the shape of a Cyberman's eye.
Right.
And it's all over the place in their institute. And at one point, the doctor is saying, when he still doesn't realize the Cybermen are involved, he's saying, I keep feeling like I'm missing something obvious, something that's staring me right in the face. And as he's saying that, he and Dr. Chang go through double doors. And as the doors swing back, there's one of these logos on one door, and then as the other door swings back, it's also got a mirror image of that logo on it, and it's like you're staring a Cyberman in the eyes,
right,
on these doors. And so it's like, yeah, the doctor's missing something obvious here.
Yes, that was a nice moment. That was very, very cool reveal there. Awesome. So we do have some feedback I wanted to share. This was on our feedback related to our recent episode where we had a retrospective on the 13th Doctor and Chris Chibnall's showrunner era, and then look a little bit looking forward to the Russell T Davies return. And so the first feedback comes from Tim Lucchese via YouTube, who wrote, "Dear Russell T Davies, you want a Doctor Who cinematic universe? Much like the 10th Doctor destroying Harriet Jones, I have 6 words for you. Fugitive Doctor and Missy team up."
That would be fascinating.
That would be
fun.
A lot of fun. Wow. I just imagining the repartee would be fantastic. And then this comes from Jason via Discord on our Discord server. And he says, all right, since you read Discord on the podcast, it's time I give you guys a rant. Mm-hmm. Science fiction isn't meant to be just spaceships firing lasers. It's meant to show us a mirror of our society, to show us how our world could be. It can give us hope, but more often it gives us warnings. Jimmy, you act as if you'd read something like Brave New World, Ready Player One, or The Hunger Games and dismiss them as woke. No. I like when Doctor Who is preachy. I want those messages. Science fiction is best not when it's fun, but when it's grim. Please read this. I think the best stories are the ones that make us feel, the ones that make us angry, the ones that sadden us. You are dismissing these stories simply because you disagree with them. Stop whining. Doctor Who was preachy from the beginning. How can a show with robotic space Nazis not be political? Russell T Davies will bring the politics. He did it with It's a Sin, it's a show that he did, by criticizing the response to AIDS in the 80s. Deal with it. Maybe you need an open mind. Okay. Response?
So while I'm waiting on Amazon to ship my new open mind, I would say that since I was the target of this one, I would say that I don't dismiss things like Brave. Now, I haven't seen Ready Player One, but I have, I'm familiar with Brave New World, and I wouldn't dismiss it as woke. I recognize that there are political messages in science fiction and in other fiction. It's not limited to science fiction. But science fiction's job fundamentally is to entertain and not to preach. And there is a line where if you include too much preaching, it ceases to be entertainment and it becomes annoying. This is one of the classic problems, and this is not just a problem with science fiction. This is also a classic problem with Christian fiction. Because a lot of explicitly Christian fiction is terrible because it's too preachy. It's not actually a compelling story about compelling characters. It's some kind of extended parable, and its primary function is didactic rather than to provide entertainment and enrichment and an insight on the human experience. So this isn't a distinctly science fiction thing. I agree with Mark Twain. Yes, there can be political elements, and they can be of whatever stripe you want. It doesn't have to be woke. It could be something else. In fact, if you go back in Doctor Who's history, especially in the early days, there's a mixture of different political themes. Some of them tend to skew liberal. Some of them tend to skew conservative. It's not all one thing. Having said that, as Mark Twain put it, the purpose of fiction is never to preach overtly, but to always preach covertly. So yeah, you can have your values of whatever they may be in the fiction, They just need to not be the primary thing you're there about. Right. If you look at, for example, Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry felt very passionately about certain messages. And in the original series, they come out really strongly. There are certain episodes that are message episodes. And the only one of them that really works is Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. And that only works because of the sudden reveal that one of these races is black on the left and white on the right, and the other is the reverse, because nobody in the audience noticed that until they pointed it out. And that is an effective way of pointing out how ridiculous racism is. And that's why people remember that episode, is because of that one reveal. But you look at other Gene Roddenberry message episodes, and the consensus among Star Trek fandom is these are inferior because it's just too much about the message, not enough about the characters and the story. And so the same is true, I would say, of Doctor Who. I do have an open mind. I am able to appreciate stories, even when I disagree with the politics in them, as long as they're good stories. But in the Chibnall era, with episodes, like, for example, Demons of the Punjab versus Rosa. Demons of the Punjab is a much better episode. Oh, yeah. Now, it does have political stuff in it, but it paints us a complex portrait that makes sense in context, and it's a much better episode. Rosa is completely unbalanced in terms, it's just ham-fisted. It is not presenting us with a portrait of humanity. It is however you want to say it, it's paint by numbers, it's cartoon coloring book type writing with a space Nazi racist that makes absolutely no sense given the backstory they've established for him. So I think it is a fairly widely spread sentiment in Doctor Who fandom. It's not universal, but it's fairly widespread that during the Chris Chibnall era, a lot of things became a lot more political in a way that harmed the story. And I would say it is not science fiction's function any more than any other fiction fiction's function to preach at us. If I want to be preached at, I'll go to church.
And I will take up on that, because there is a time and place for preaching, and I do it every Sunday. That's my job. One of my jobs when I'm up there at the altar is to preach, and I hopefully am a good preacher. That being said, I'm going to push back on the idea of fiction, science fiction being best when it's grim and dark and all that. I think some of the best science fiction are those that can tell a good story, a good uplifting story, and can do it while presenting a message. Having a message within fiction is a good thing. It makes interesting fiction, but doing it preaching. One example I can think of where this fails is actually C.S. Lewis and his space trilogy. It's got an interesting story to begin with, but then he gets more into the philosophy and the theology of the fall and preaching about, salvation and all that. And by the end of the third book, I lost interest because it was more about, this race on Venus being saved than it was actually, telling a good story. Jimmy, you brought up Christian fiction. I read one summer when I was a seminarian, the Left Behind series, and that was the mainline Left Behind series that had just been finished. And the people I was living with actually had a copy of the entire series. And it's mostly just kind of turn off your brain fiction. You just kind of enjoy it for the sake of reading something that you just kind of read through, and it's easy reading and everything. But about halfway through, they start bringing in characters that do start explicitly preaching, where there's literally paragraphs of this person writing a blog that is preaching. And it becomes completely derails the entire story from that point on. It becomes about telling preaching. And so there's ways to tell stories that don't fall into that trap. I'm
sorry. I just want to add on that the whole. I think it's a very important point he makes, or important point I want to address, where he claims that science fiction is best when it's not fun, but when it's grim. That's an opinion. If you like grim science fiction, that's valid. by all means, go seek that out. But that's not a universal axiom. That's not universally true. I mean, it's best for you, perhaps. But for me, science fiction is best is when it's reveals something good and true and beautiful about humanity, about the universe. And that's one of the things about a podcast like this is we're talking about our point of view and based on some universal understandings from our Christian faith background. And that's, I think, an important distinction is, a lot of this, of course, is opinion. We are expressing our opinions, but it's also not divorced from understandings of what our faith teaches us either. Right. And so, and I think it's important to maybe point out too that we might have a different definition of woke that we're working from, because the way our letter writer describes it seems a little bit more expansive and generic than I think we might phrase our own criticism, or at least how I might.
Speak for me again, and I will detach something from you.
Yeah,
I realized at the end I was saying we, royal we, but that's
notice
me.
In my response, I didn't even use the word woke. I just spoke in terms of politics generically to avoid getting entangled in what exactly is woke or what is not.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's if talking about the dark sci-fi, grim dark sci-fi, that traditionally hasn't been Doctor Who. It's had elements of that at times. It's had, horror. It's had all these different genres of science fiction. But the series as a whole has actually been generally very positive and uplifting and hopeful. The character of the Doctor generally has been a hopeful character. It's the times he's ranting against humanity, and then there's times where he's praising humanity for the hope and the joy and the light that it brings. And so for Doctor Who to kind of go that way is not something we want to see, and again, there are very good science fiction, the Blade Runners, things like that have that darkness, but that's not what Doctor Who is about usually.
Yeah, Star Trek isn't either. Star Trek is known for its optimistic future, and Doctor Who is on balance optimistic, even if there are monsters that you hide behind the sofa for. But if our correspondent is believes that for him science fiction is best when it's dark and gritty, that's fine. That's one take. It's not a universal one, and I'd encourage him to also go on Amazon and order an open mind.
So thank you, Radical Edward, for your feedback, and we welcome all feedback, and we love to hear from our listeners and what you think. So thank you very much.
Even if you disagree with us, we love to hear.
Even if you, especially sometimes. All right, so we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Gary J, Michelle H, Christopher P, Thomas V, and Leonidas S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you think of the 12th Doctor story, Dark Water. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com. Or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. And like I said before,
you could get overload and decision paralysis.
Right, or don't do any of it. You can also watch The Secrets of Doctor Who now in full video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. We'll be back next time. We'll be discussing this second Doctor story, The Wheel in Space.
Wait. So this is a two-parter with Dark Water and the one that follows it. Do we want to next time finish this story arc?
Oh, okay.
Two-parter.
Yeah, sure. We can do that too. Changing gears right as we speak. Next time we'll be discussing the second part of this two-parter, which the name eludes me from the moment, but you know what it is. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thanks, Tom.
Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, do you think I care for you so little that betraying me would make a difference?